Hi, I'm Joi Ito, director of the Media Lab, and welcome to MLTalks. We'll be streaming this, so your questions will be on camera. And for people who are watching online, you can tweet at MLTalks, and towards the end, we'll be having a conversation and taking questions. So please make comments or ask questions. Today is a kind of a unique panel, and we'll see where it goes. The title is Transhumanism, Searching for Spirit in the Machine. And first of all, we've got the Venerable Tenzin Priyadarshi, who teaches a class called Principles and Awareness with me and runs the Ethics Initiative here. Max Tegmark, a physics professor at MIT, who's written a recent bestseller. It's Life 3.0, Being Human. And he's also runs the big Salobir conference where we talk a lot about transhumanism and AI. Father Eric Salobir, who is a Catholic priest, is in the Dominican order and runs the research network there, working on things like encryption and AI. I think is one of the geekiest Catholic priests I've ever met, but also has some roles in the Vatican and helps inform the Catholics on technology. And last but not least, Professor Martha Minow from the Harvard Law School, who was until recently the dean there and a mentor of mine. And so Martha will be leading this conversation.
I will do my best. Let me just say that this is a daunting subject, and we have the right people to be talking about it. I'm going to ask a question and ask each of you to comment on it, and I predict that several of you will say that's the wrong question. But the question I'm going to ask is, what is your position on transhumanism and singularity? Let me start with Max.
Good luck.
When people ask me for my position on artificial intelligence, are you for it or are you against it? I respond by asking them about fire. Are you for it or are you against it? Of course, we're for it to keep Media Lab warm in the winter and against it for arson. And artificial intelligence is no difference. Any technology can be used to help people, it can be used to harm people. Technology is morally neutral. In terms of the singularity you asked about, do I think that eventually artificial intelligence researchers will succeed in their original goal of figuring out how to make machines that can do all cognitive tasks human can better? Yeah, probably. That's not a very controversial opinion. That's what most AI researchers think now. In polls, they're putting it maybe on average 30, 40 years from today. Am I for it or against it? I mean, to me, the interesting question is rather, what can we do now to make sure that this powerful technology becomes a good thing, not a bad thing? And I'm so happy that this isn't a panel consisting only of tech nerds like myself, because this is obviously not just a question of technology. It's a question very much about life, about humanity, about spirituality. What do we want, ultimately, to do with our technology? This is a question which, at the NIPS conference in California, I just came back from, 8,000 people trying to build this stuff, hardly ever came up. Obviously, companies want to build it to make a profit. Tech geeks like me like to build things just because it's cool. But what are we trying to accomplish here? Surely we as a species should be more ambitious than just trying to build our own obsolescence as fast as possible. I'm optimistic in that I think we have the opportunity to create a really inspiring future with technology, but that's going to require that we win the race between the growing power of the tech and the growing wisdom with which we manage it, and it's going to require also that we figure out what direction we want to steer in. That's why my book has a subtitle, Being Human in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. I think if we can figure out what it is we're trying to what we want to create for society, we're much more likely to get it.
So, as predicted, it's the wrong question. Father Eric, what is the right question?
Oh, that's a tough question, actually. What I would say is, for me, I would say it's the wrong question about transhumanism, because my point is that all the technologies which are behind can be used. I will not say that they are neutral, because I don't believe in neutrality of technology. I think they are multi-purpose, which is different. So they can be used for something good or for something bad. But I think that there's a lot of intentionality which is embedded inside. But from those technologies, which can be used for many things, some people decided to frame something that they call transhumanism. And I think that just raising this topic makes advertise this topic, but I'm not so sure that it's a key topic. I mean, for me, the question is, how do we use those technologies, and which society do we frame, do we build with those technologies, instead of trying to find a way out of humanity, I would say.
Very good. Of course, one of the questions, who's the we in this? So, Venerable Tenzin, what's the right question?
Well, I can't tell you that. But I think, technology is fire, and the fire is here. Part of the challenge is that, regardless of the medium, as in technology being neutral or not, is designers and users are never neutral. And so part of the issue becomes is, what is the relationship interface between the technology that we design and its designers and users on that. Singularity, I'm a bit skeptical about at this stage. I belong to a tradition that for thousands of years has argued about oneness and non-duality, and we're still sort of continuing that argument in terms of its relevance and what it implies for civic society. So part of the issue around singularity, of course, would be around purposefulness. What meaning does it bring to human existence?
Great. Joey, do you want to answer the question, what's the right question, or do you want to put a different question?
Well, so I can try to meta-answer that, which is, so first of all, I think asking the question is the most important thing. And I think that a lot of engineering and a lot of computation is focused on solving a problem for which we think we know what the question is. And often the question, like MIT, we call, hey, we're going to try to make a better world. That's our capital campaign. But better for who at what time scale? Better for shareholders at the quarterly time scale, better for Native Americans in 7 generations, better for the Earth, regardless of human beings. This is a whole bunch of different better for who at what time scale. And I think one of the things that so I recently saw a demonstration that was fairly convincing in showing that we will probably have an AI that will be able to win at any game better than a human being. And the people who were showing it to me were saying, so here's proof, we've got the AGI. And I said, well, you've got something that's better at humans at winning a game. And they're like, but life is a game. And I said, but see, life is a game only if you know what the question is, which is what it is to win. But I think that the problem we have is we have an endocrine system, we have pheromones, we have serendipity, we have all kinds of things that constantly influence what we want. And what we want influences what the game is for us at any given moment or for society. And so for me, the thing that's interesting is I think that we can create a machine that can solve problems very well and is computationally powerful. But I don't think that we can create a machine that answers the question that you're asking is, what's the question? Because that's actually, you don't answer it, it happens, right? And I think the problem is it happens in the real world with physics and chemistry and things like that. And so I think that the current approach to AGI is a little bit simplistic, and I feel like the singularity curve, there's sort of it's funny to say it in front of Father Eric, but there's sort of a Hail Mary at the end where you just extrapolate this ability to solve problems into the ability to ask the question, which I don't think you can just jump to. And so that's one thing. And then I think also Norbert Wiener in The Human Use of Human Beings talks about bureaucracies and rules and governments and corporations being automation and being machines. And if you are the Uber driver or the administrator, you're just a machine of flesh and blood. And I think that what we're doing with AI isn't to try to create an adversarial unit against humans. I think what we're doing is we're computationally empowering different parts of this complex system. Like the market, we already have a system that's out of control, opaque, and nearly autonomous. I think we agreed in Paris that there's no such thing as autonomy except maybe God, right? So I think what's happening is that my concern is that I think we're just going to make things more complex and more difficult and more powerful. And our systems that we have today, that our governments, our corporations, they're already kind of out of control and pointed in roughly the wrong direction. And I think what we're going to do is supercharge them to go reeling off in those bad directions. And that the key thing is to get our house in order before we put our booster rockets on. And it's not going to be, and this is where there's two categories, at least two categories of singularity people who believe that the machine will just figure out complexity and we'll go, oh, and we'll go to some sort of transcendental state, and others believe it's going to be scary. I think that it isn't just going to solve itself. And so my concern is getting our house in order before, both ethically and sort of systemically, before this power comes.
Does anyone want to respond to anyone else? Because yes.
I think just to, one is the aspect of, how we create technology systems or organizations that the intent might have been to complement human society, but it becomes adversarial, like market and things of that nature. And with AI, again, it becomes, at the core of it is what it is being designed for. If it's only designed with the sense of optimization, meaning just to perform tasks better and at a faster speed. In that regard, human beings are obsolete to begin with, because we are the most inefficient creation when it comes to things. And it will automatically sort of lead to this adversarial relationship if we are simply looking for optimization in terms of efficiency, because that will sort of destroy the relationship framework.
Great. Just to add to what you were both saying, I completely agree with Joi that one of the best things we can do to prepare is to get our house in order first, ethically and morally as a society, and try to... I think it might be worthwhile, just both for us and for everybody else, also to just define our terms a little bit. So AGI usually refers to artificial general intelligence, which is AI that's able to do everything cognitive that we humans do, at least as well. We obviously don't have it, but that's the thing that many people think is in the pipeline. Singularity usually refers to something else. So if you have, because there are a lot of people like Irving J. Good and Ray Kurzweil who have argued that once you get to AGI, it can start improving itself, and boom, soon it's not just a little bit better, but way better than us. That's a whole conversation whether that happens or not. And third, I think, when we think about intelligent agents and life and so on, I really dislike this carbon chauvinism attitude that things can only be smart if they're made of carbon atoms. And I think we should be more inclusive and diverse and view life as any entity that can retain its complexity and replicate, and anything that can solve complex goals as being intelligent. And in that sense, what that means is if we actually succeed in creating AGI, we shouldn't think of it just as creating a tool. We should think of it as creating a new life form. And here I think the spiritual dimensions are really interesting, because I feel as a Westerner, raised in Sweden, a lot of people coming out of have made this really ugly interpretation of the Judeo-Christian tradition of saying that, well, even animals are just tools for us to mistreat however we want, and factory farming and so on. And from that, it's very natural to take the next step and say, well, any machines are also just our slaves, regardless of how smart they are. And I think that's a very, very unfortunate attitude to have. If we can let go of that sort of carbon chauvinist attitude and think of there being other ways of having very profound life forms as well that aren't made of carbon, but then there's obviously a fascinating moral dimension to all of this. If we choose to create another life form on Earth that's smarter than us, it's something we should think quite hard about. And people aren't. At NIPS, people were running all these amazing AI systems that could even beat us in chess and Go and poker. Nobody even thought about the question of whether it was okay to switch them off at will and treat them badly. They just view this as silly, stupid fluff that people who are interested in philosophy worry about. But that's a little bit like we used to dismiss also the suffering of slaves and so on in the past. And I would just encourage us all to have a more broad-minded view of life.
Yeah, but what I could add is, what's our ability to deal with those new things? For example, even the current AIs we have and the way we implement them in the society, for example, in the judicial system or in economy, we see that it doesn't only change the way we do things, so it doesn't multiply the effect, it changes what we're doing. I mean, the way we deal with justice, for example, in criminal justice, using AI is a switch between a justice of consequences, I do something bad so I can be punished, to a justice of correlation. I'm in the box of the people who could do something bad, and so I could be punished for that. Changing completely the relationship we have, for example, with our own responsibility, and changing even the definition of what it is, what's justice. And that is something which is already happening now, so we're very far from the singularity, but even at that point, we're already changing drastically things much more than what we say. And I come back on this question of intentionality, and let's say what are the questions behind? I think we don't ask ourselves another question. We know that the ultimate answer is 42, but we don't know the question. I mean, no, every priest knows that, yeah. We learned that in the seminary, yeah. But actually, no, but I think that's why I would like to go deeper in the, let's say, the anthropological consequences even of what we're currently doing, we're currently implementing. Because two things. First, it's right now, so it's not science fiction, it's not future, it's our responsibility right now. And the second point is dealing with those simpler topics could help us to be ready to deal with singularity if it occurs at some point. I mean, there's a kind of probably human enhancement in many ways, but there's also a kind of moral enhancement which requires for us to be aware of those questions and which requires for us to learn how to deal with those questions. I think for me that's a key point to be ready.
There's three themes that I'd like to pull out here. One is the question of what is the effect of what's currently happening on people who are currently called human. The second is what is the relationship that human beings should build with intelligent other beings that are the product of human creation. And a third is a little more complicated is can we stop time? Because Joi says, first we have to get our house in order. Father Eric says, it's already happening and already changing us. So I guess I'd put this in the form not just of can we stop time, but what should be done right now versus what should be built over time.
If I just a little thing, I think that the way we will deal with other, let's say, species or creatures that we can create will be related to the way we are able to deal with the other human beings. I think it will not be different. If we think about slaves, why? Because we've created slavery. And actually, slavery still exists in many countries. It's not called slavery, but it exists, or human trafficking, or whatever. So first, we need to be clear on this point, the interaction we have with the other human beings. How do we deal with them without using them? That's the moral imperative of Kant. Never consider a human being as a way to get something else, but just as an end by itself. If we're able to do that with the other human beings, then probably we could be more prepared to do that with what we will create.
I agree with that.
But Max and then Joi.
I agree with that. I think if you look throughout the history of our cosmos, the last 13.8 billion years, relationships between different life forms tend to be characterized either by cooperation or by fighting, and where the most powerful one dominates the one that's less powerful. And you already mentioned how this is the attitude we've taken towards slaves, towards farm animals, and so on. If this is also the attitude we're going to take towards machines, because we're stuck in this sort of carbon chauvinist attitude that then that leads to one school of thought for what we should do. I have a number of AI colleagues who think what we should do is build enslaved gods, machines who are in all ways more competent than us, but they will only serve us, and then whoever controls that can control the world. We even had Putin saying not too long ago that whoever controls AI rules the world, and if we create an intelligence more powerful than humans, of course, whoever, it'll be that way. Which doesn't just pose a lot of ethical problems, but as I explore in my book, it's very likely that that enslaved God will eventually manage to also break out and might...
There's several movies with that as a theme.
Yeah,
yes.
there are plenty of movies. But then there's a different approach. If we start instead trying to have a collaborative approach between different living beings, right? That's the friendly AI approach, and where I want to remind everybody that it doesn't have to be a scary thing to be in the presence of beings more intelligent than us, because you've all done that already when you were about this big. They were mommy and daddy, right? And why did that work out so well? Because their goals were aligned with your goals. So value alignment is crucial here. And this is one of the most fascinating, this leads into your other question about what we can do. I think there's a fascinating technical research area of how to get machines to understand our goals, adopt our goals, retain our goals. And if we can, all of those questions are very hard, but there are a lot of very talented people are starting to work on them now, and if we can crack that one, I think there's the real promise of having a very constructive relationship with the machines that we build. And I must say, I much prefer this collaborative approach rather than the adversarial, try to dominate and enslave approach. And finally, you asked this very good question of, well, can we stop the clock? If you want to win this race, this wisdom race between the growing power of the AI and the wisdom with which we manage it, there are two strategies to winning races, right? You can either try to slow down the other guy or go faster yourself. You can try to win the Boston Marathon by serving 1-week-old shrimp to all the other runners maybe the night before. I think it's a better strategy to exercise and try to be faster yourself. I don't think it's realistic to stop AI research. But since there's so little effort right now going into the other runner here, the development of this wisdom, let's really double down on that and make that go much faster.
Great. Joey?
Yeah, I don't want to put my own religion on a pedestal, but just I will point out that it's kind of interesting to look at Japan, because our core original indigenous religion, which my parents practice, is Shinto. And in Shinto, we don't believe that humans are particular in the fact that they have a spirit. And so when you finish using your needles, you have a funeral for them, you have to talk to the tree before you cut the bough. So Japan has never really had a problem with us versus them with machines. So robots were always okay. And if you look at Japanese anime, they're always at the end, the machine and the human become one.
Right.
And so I think that it's kind of interesting because I think in Japan, we're not going to have any problem with the notion of having the other sort of blended together. And I do think it's going to be a hybrid, both at the cellular level as well as the societal level. And then the other thing is that we haven't had the same kind of slave uprising thing in Japan. And so there's a great book called Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi. And he describes the history of racism in America, but goes all the way back to Aristotle and shows how the theologians and the scientists have justified slavery throughout history, partially to allow the economy to function in a certain way. So you had America becoming the sort of slave superpower, and you had the theologians and the scientists sort of justifying it. But I think what it's caused is it's caused this really interesting relationship between slaves and the slaveholders in the West and slave uprisings. And so there's a fear, I think, that the Western Judeo-Christians have of, because they've just had constant history of slave uprisings. And so they're afraid that the machines are going to be slaves at the beginning and then come and uprise over us. And that's kind of, I think, another narrative that certain cultures don't have. And so to me, one of the interesting sort of, so Japan's a little behind on AI, but I think culturally we're a little bit more advanced in that I think that, to your point about living. Well, now having said that, Japan has all kinds of problems, but at least we won't have the same Judeo-Christian Pygmalion complex worry that the machine's going to come and take over.
Father Eric.
Yeah, for me, perhaps we have two challenges. The first one is that if we can build this kind of AGI, the difficulties coming from the human being will come from the both sides, because we have the way we deal with this new entity, this new being, but there's also the way it was created. And probably, and that's why I come to the question of intentionality, I think we will embed many things from ourselves in our creature. Because in a creature, there's always something of the creator. And it can be the bright side, and it can be the dark side too. And it can be conscious, but it can also be unconscious. Just to give you an example, it reminds me to a very old science fiction movie. Astronauts land on a planet, and they are the ruins of a very brilliant civilization, but no survivor. And they discovered that at some point, this civilization has created a super machine able to fulfill all the needs and accomplish all their wishes. But because they were very wise, they thought it cannot be anything bad. And then they fall asleep and start to dream. And during the night, because of all the bad dreams, the machine killed everybody. So I think that just to explain that actually in the way we build an AI, we embed many things from ourselves. And perhaps we will make it hostile or dangerous just in the way we make it, just because we know that the human being can be aggressive, and this kind of aggressivity or a propension to fight or to want to dominate, which is part of our human nature, we will put in the machine without knowing that in the algorithms, in the data, in the way it's trained or whatever. So I think that's the first challenge. The second one is with the slaves, we were not the creators of the slaves. We are just other human beings denying them the status of free human beings. In this case, we will also be the creator. So it puts us in a very different situation toward this machine. And the temptation to dominate the creature, to be let's say a creator as the Greeks or Latin gods in mythology, which were actually human beings fighting, being jealous, doing all bad things, but involving the human beings in their fights. And actually, that's the way that could happen if we don't take care of those elements.
I think this takes us back to Tenzin's emphasis on purpose and purposefulness. And I'm wondering what kind of process is necessary for the purposes to be broadened to include the kinds of themes that this conversation is raising. And who needs to be part of the process of building not just AI, but AGI? Who needs to be around the table? Who's we? Tenzin.
Well, right now, we is about 6 or 7 large companies in the world. We can all have the deception that we have a say in it in some ways. But we love to live in our deceptive realities regardless. I think the challenge becomes, again, when Max says something like, goal alignment, that our goal ought to be the same goal as AGI. I'm not too clear if humanity knows what its goal is.
Yes.
To be able to even articulate that, to be able to design a function or a system on that. The other part of it is to recognize that deep down, on a daily basis, we are driven by emotions. We are driven by reward functions. We are driven by a desire for introspection or no desire for introspection. Meaning that there are a number of things that we don't even recognize whether machine systems would have it or not. Meaning that, what is a sentient life form without desire? What is a sentient life form without purpose? What is a sentient life form without fear? Okay. So you may call them carbon chauvinists, but they are driven by these bits of things, of desire, of reward functions, of fear, and things like that. With AGI, you don't see that. You're not going to program those things into that, right? So then the issue becomes is, by design, it's a very uneven relationship. Right? So yes, again, we have this propensity for a master-slave dynamic, but when it comes to efficiency, which is driving most of the social organizations today, I think, AI or AGI in whatever form is going to win. And the issue becomes is, what the role of human is going to be.
Will there be work for humans, and will there be meaning for humans? Right?
Yeah.
Well, will humans be needed?
Well, it's not even a question of need. I mean, it's a question of, so we have belabored the point on work identity, labor displacement, things of this nature. And Max and I last week we were somewhere where people were discussing UBIs and things of that nature. It's almost sounds like a consolation prize of some sort. But it's nice. I mean, yes, I would love to live in a world where people do have universal basic income. But what do you do with aspects of power, of greed, of deceit in human beings? When was the last time we as human beings as a society lived peacefully because we had too much free time and nothing else to do? Okay? We don't have very good history of that. So part of the issue becomes is that, yes, the reality is AI is here and it's going to evolve. But at the same time, we need to figure out, what civic society is going to look like and what the interfaces are going to be.
Who's the we? Who's doing that? Still is a question for me.
I just want to poke the word of figure out, right? Because one of the problems that I have in academia sometimes is there's a sort of an urge to figure things out, but figuring it out doesn't mean you can do anything about it, And I think that in theory, practice and theory are the same, but they're not, right? So for me, one of the other questions that I'd like to throw in is we can all say it should be this, but we have a complex self-adaptive system that's careening down the road, and our ability to influence it, even the people in charge, are not able to redesign the system in any way. And so I don't think we even have a methodology for intervening in this crazy thing, even if we knew exactly what to do. Because so that I just sort of the practical engineering side of me also says, that we need to think about how we
So you each have a magic wand. What 1, 2, 3 things would you change so that concerns about meaning, relationship, goal alignment, collaboration, respect are part of the future development of AI and AGI? Eric?
I would say 2 things, perhaps. The first one is an AGI will be for all of us. So what's about all of us has to be with all of us. And that's part of the rules of government, of my religious order. What is lived by everybody has to be decided by everybody. That's why we're a democracy. And I think that that's the way it has to be for the building of such a big project. So we need to involve more, and I know it's not easy, but to involve more the civil society, including religions, but also many other people, just to be sure that it's not only market or business driven, or even managed by governments that could do that, or build it in a way which will protect their interest, or protect the law, or whatever, let's say the order. And I think that will be the big challenge, knowing that I think that most of things are pretty secret and there's a lot of money in that. So it's not so easy to involve the civil society, but if it's not the case, we will fail. The second point is about, let's say, formation of the next generation, preparing the people for that. Someone told me last week I was in the Silicon Valley, I had a lunch, and one of those CEOs said we could ask to have AI as a human right, as access to AI like access to water. Because at some point, without that, we will have people having AI and without people who
inequality.
Yeah, exactly, a kind of a new gap in equality. That's the point, and we need also to train people to live in a world with AI. If we don't want people to feel challenged all the time or always in the spirit of competition, we need to help people to deal with that. Being useful for me is not everything. I agree with you. Everybody has to find his role in the society. It's part of the Maslow pyramid, and we know that we're built like that. But the last time people had plenty of free time and used that positively was during the ancient Greece. I mean, in those big cities, skole, it means school. Skole was free time for study, for philosophy, for politics. But it means that it was for a small group of people, highly trained, having a highly educated, I would say. And the question is, how can we help a larger group of people, I would say at the end, all the humanity at the end of the day, to deal with that? And I think that will be the main challenge.
Great. So you give us 3 waves of the wand?
Yes.
So, since you only waved yours twice, I'll wave mine 4 times. But the first 3 are, I think, no-brainers, things we should do. We should prevent a pointless arms race and lethal autonomous weapons. We should make sure that the great wealth that will be produced by AI helps make everybody better off, and we should invest heavily in technical AI safety research. Let me just elaborate a little bit on those three. So, arms race. Well, any science can be used to help people or to harm people. Raise your hand if you've studied biology or chemistry. I bet none of you is doing chemical weapons or biological weapons right now. And I think it'll be awesome if in the future, when I ask people who do AI, who's building AI weapons to kill people, nobody raises their hands either on that one. But we're on the cusp of starting an arms race. There was a big meeting in Geneva just the other week. It's kind of a diplomatic flop. And if this really gets going, there's going to be much more money in the military AI sector than the civilian, and we're going to look back with nostalgia at the nuclear arms race. So that I hope we can avoid. Second, for the money part, again, obviously there's an enormous potential to grow the overall economic pie if machines can produce all the goods and services we need. And if we can't figure out a way as a society to make sure that everybody gets better off from this, shame on us. It's really lame that things are going exactly in the opposite direction. My personal opinion is that the new tax plan that's going to be adopted this week is exactly a step in the opposite direction of where we need to go. Third, AI safety research. So it's easy to say, oh, let's figure out how to make machines understand our goals, adopt them, and retain them. But it's actually really hard. If you tell your future self-driving car to take you to Logan as fast as possible, and you get there covered in vomit and chased by helicopters, and you say, no, that's not what I asked for. And it says, that's exactly what you asked for. Then you've understood how hard it is to get machines to really understand what you want, right? And similarly, and raise your hand if you have kids. Then you know how big the difference is between getting these intelligent beings to understand what you want and do what you want. And third, retaining our goals. If you have machines that can improve themselves, my kids were super excited about Legos when they were little. Now, and when they're teenagers, not so much. So if we manage to build machines that are very keen on helping humanity, we don't want them to get as bored with that goal when they get smarter as my kids got with Legos. So that, I think, those are the three no-brainers. And the fourth little wand waving is actually a question to all of you, because you asked the question, whose goals are we talking about? You pointed out, Joi, that even if we know where we want to go, it's hard to see what exactly we can do to change the course we're on. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't at least ask where we want to go. And I would love to hear each of you share anything you care to share about what sort of society you would be really excited about having, say 30 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now. I listed a whole bunch of thought experiments in the 5th chapter of my book just to get people thinking about something other than some scenarios other than the Hollywood dystopia. But we as a society seem obsessed about just envisioning everything that can go wrong, and we're really avoiding trying hard to envision positive scenarios. So if anyone wants to share a future you're really excited about, I'd love to hear.
Let's meditate on that while we hear any magic wand waves from the rest of the group. And in about 10 minutes, we're going to open it up for comments and questions.
I think my magic wand would be more around instilling certain values and things. One would be compassion. I wish that for sentient creatures, and I would wish that for AGI if it is capable of developing that. I am not so keen that we don't have a big enough pie right now to share. We have a lot of inhibitions and obstacles that we are not willing to share it. So, 30 years, 40 years down the road, just because we have a big pie doesn't automatically imply the willingness to share it. So I would wave the wand around fairness and see if humans, as well as machine systems that are designed for efficiency and optimization of different forms, can optimize on fairness properly to be able to distribute and redistribute things. You see, and part of the thing is that I don't envision too many new problems when it comes to human existence and questions around that. I think a lot of it we're already grappling with that we haven't grappled with in the past. The issue simply becomes is, will we be asking again the right questions to solve the challenges? I cannot say, AI should become a basic human right. I come from a village where we don't even have clean drinking water or electricity. When I heard that they wanted to make digital access, anything that in this bubble of ours we find good for humanity, want to make it accessible to everybody, it's not happening at the pace that we want it. And even if it happens at that pace, I'm not entirely sure if it makes us happier or more content or more in service of others. So I would look for those qualities to be propagated more in these systems.
Something that you said made me think about one reason to be worried about optimization. So we, of course, think fairness is important. We also think that individualization is important. We think equality is important. We also think efficiency is important. And one of the things that human societies have developed is a messiness of non-optimization, so that we juggle and manage and don't optimize for one or two or three of these criteria.
Yeah.
And it's a worry about optimization.
I mean, the example that Max gives about a parent taking care of the child. Parents are not optimizing and saying that child has more potential, so I'm going to give more care to that one, and that child has polio or is challenged in some way, so I'm not going to give them enough care, and so on. Because parents are not driven by those optimization algorithms. There are other things, other variables that come into consideration. And so the issue becomes that if systems, whether they are specialized AI systems or whether they're AGIs, have some sort of built-in mechanism that takes these variables into account, I think that'll be great.
Magic wand.
So I guess I would say you're using optimization in a particular definition. I think we optimize, but in a more complex way. And I think what the problem is, so going back to my complex system careening down the street metaphor, I think that the way you intervene in a complex self-adaptive system is you have to change the paradigm, because the paradigm determines what you can think, which also sets the goals. So I think the extractive, shareholder, equity-driven economy that drives our democracy now, too, is created by the paradigm of the way we think about economics and how we measure things, right? And so I think it's kind of like we have a mathematics that can only do addition and subtraction in integers, and so it's very limited in what it can express, but we try. So we try to express justice in behavioral economics. We try to convert everything into economics or triple bottom line, but it's still, at the end of the day, accounting. And I think the problem is that the accounting system is very reductionist and is trying to describe something in a particular way and then creates an optimization system that's also very simple. And I think the problem is that the human body life is actually quite complex, and I don't think that after a certain point, economics, I think, is very valuable in dealing with the distribution of physical resources and so on. In the old saying, I mean, it increases GDP to break the window. It doesn't increase GDP to take care of your child. So somehow we've created a language that allows us to optimize for a certain set of things. And so to me, my magic wand would be to try to figure out a different way to understand the world than accounting or economics, and try to get that to infiltrate society through probably song or culture, and this gets back to values. But I think that the thing is, if you can't describe the values in an economic way, even it doesn't end up, it ends up on the cutting room floor by the time it turns into law and behavior and optimization. So I think, though, that if you can describe it, we might be able to optimize and think about optimizing for things that are maybe more value.
If you can't put it currently in quantifiable economic language, it's a footnote that says those factors that cannot be quantified will not be explored. So that is a problem. I'm going to turn to Max. I'm then going to turn to you all. We're all going to meditate on Max's question about what we would dream of, and I'll come back there before we end.
I just
Max.
wanted to say something about diversity, inspired by what Joi said here. 'Cause one attempt people have made to quantify that other thing that you might want to optimize in the spirit of what you said, Tenzin, is to say, let's optimize positive subjective experience, whatever exactly that is. But that's led a number of transhumanists to propose to just destroy the whole biosphere and turn it all into computronium and figure out what's the best possible experience and then just tile the whole universe with that experience over and over and over again.
But that's precisely the reductionist approach.
Which
right?
seems so contrary to what we actually think of as good. And I think diversity is precisely what they're missing there. I mean, there's a reason you don't figure out what your favorite food is and eat that 3 times a day for the rest of your life. We value diversity, and somehow a diversity of experiences seems to be something
that's true.
we really need, than just. So I don't have a simple answer to what we should optimize, and my point is.
Well, no, what I'm saying, again, to clarify on optimization, all I'm suggesting is right now, because of the economic and other incentives, all we are driven by is optimization for efficiency. Mm-hmm. But human life is not simply driven by efficiency. How inefficient are some of our relationships? But we care about them. We care about humans. We care about other creatures. So part of the thing is, what are the other variables that come in? And the other part of it is that we should not have a minimum viable value system that we then reduce everything to and say, okay, let's design an algorithm around this.
All right. Father Eric, do you have something?
Just point. I'll say, for me, it's part of the narrative and probably part of the myth of transhumanism to let us believe that more is always better. Mm-hmm. And I think that it makes the difference between what's quantified self. I mean, I get this kind of smartwatch and I get many data about my body and so on. But there's all the unquantifiable part of myself, which is more related to quality. And the question is, if we work hard on improving the quantified part, we need to work hard on improving the quality part too.
That sounds, of course, right, and also not always use the I as the point of reference. Even when we talk about I care about these others, what about the others for their own sake? And what about the possibility of the humility that we don't know everything, and we are not actually in charge of everything, and that maybe there's something beyond what we know. Humility is not the characteristic quality of Silicon Valley. But I'm going to open this up. Who has a comment, a question, short, please, and identify who you are. And there's a mic here.
Carl Sagan said that the...
Say who you are, please.
Oh, sorry. Terrell Kronberg, philosopher.
Thank you.
Carl Sagan said that we are the way for the universe to know itself. And that brings up a purpose to all life. And that also brings up the element of diversity, in that every single individual animal, vegetable, mineral has some unique experience in reality that we can learn from. Not just humans. I mean, we're all unique and we all have unique experiences to add. And so maybe the purpose of AI and transhumanism is to collect all of that, all of those unique experiences.
Thank you. Let's collect a couple. Who else? Comment, question? Over here.
That's a cool idea.
My name is Dom Wise. I'm an artist. I'm wondering, since you said humans, we can't figure out the question of our own game, what would AI be aspiring towards?
Great.
What would be the goal of that?
Okay.
Like, could you
even imagine that?
Yeah.
Great. Let's take one more back here. And there's two more we're going to take. Yeah. Let's see. Can you pass this back?
It's very dangerous.
Uh-oh.
Jim Gray, I'm a research scientist here at the lab. The question about what do human beings do when we have too much time on our hands and how to make it better than history, I think play, creativity, and starting in childhood and keep nurturing the environments that provide that. So I'd be interested in people's reaction to that.
That's great. And one more over here.
Zoe Sathya Perry. So a lot of ML and AI kind of take us out of the present. And so I'm curious, what are some habits weekly habits, keystone habits that each of you have that keep you in the present every moment of the day.
Great. So we had a comment about maybe AI's purpose or effectiveness is to collect the variety of experiences. We had one about what's AI's purpose, or how can AI articulate its purpose. We had a comment about play and creativity as maybe where we could imagine we're headed. And then something about the present and mindfulness and what do we do as our own practices. So Eric, let's just go down the line.
Okay. So I would say, in terms of mindfulness, we have in the, let's say, in the Christian tradition, something that could perhaps be related to other traditions in silent prayer and meditation, but we believe that at some point, interaction with the others makes the difference. And so, for example, Catherine of Siena says, if you are in your room and you pray silently and in deep meditation, and if someone knocks at your door, go and open the door, because the God that you will meet will be stronger than the God you have left. And I think that is pretty true. Good. And so I would say, to go back to your question earlier, that a society which would be a more positive society, which will be a society more based on fair and deep relationship. That's
you know, in my tradition, I can tell you the Orthodox rabbis are debating whether or not AI can count in a minyan, because you require 10 people to pray together. That's what they're concluding, and yes is the answer. So, yes.
Interesting.
I would like to comment on both what you said and what you said, which both involve experience. +1 to the Carl Sagan quote there, I feel very strongly that it's not our universe giving meaning to us. It's us, conscious beings, giving meaning to our universe. All these galaxies out there are beautiful because we are consciously experiencing them. If there were no consciousness in our cosmos, these galaxies wouldn't be beautiful. They would just be a gigantic waste of space. Now, turning to your question, what would AI, if it's really smart, ultimately decide to do? I think to answer that, we first have to be clear on that the mind space available to design intelligence is vastly larger than the mind space available to an evolved intelligence, as you, Tenzin, pointed out so clearly. So much of our experience is colored by things that evolution obviously gave us. There's urges to eat and drink and this and that and the other thing. And
to imagine dystopias is one thing that we were designed to do.
For example. And that means that we have to be very careful when someone comes and tells us, and this happens to me pretty often, someone comes and says, Max, stop worrying about this stuff. If we build a machine much smaller than us, it'll figure out what the right thing is to do, and we can delegate to it to find the answer. I think that argument is just not logically valid. It assumes that there's only one thing, one kind of mind space that an AI can have, and any sufficiently intelligent agent is going to want to do the same thing. It depends on how it's programmed, right? If suppose Hitler had gotten access to superintelligence, would that really have made things better for our history of our planet? I don't think so. And I think rather it's very likely that there is we're sort of at this fork in the road in our cosmic history where, depending on what sort of advanced intelligence we create, the history can go in many very, very different directions. Some of them which we might find with our values are really inspiring, and some of which we find are quite horrible. And that's why I'm so interested in hearing what directions people feel we really like to go in and try to steer things in that direction. You know, as parents, we put a lot of effort into value alignment, into raising our children to try to instill what we consider good values into them. So if we as a species give rise to another life form, which we can in some sense maybe think of as children of humanity, we better raise it well.
We can't imagine.
Yeah.
There may be values that we can't even yet imagine.
Yeah.
That seems just right.
Yeah.
Tenzin.
I support your quoting of Sagan, And so if, yes, AI in the future helps us grow in this mutual relationship, I think that's a fabulous thing. If it helps us become better humans, more wise, more compassionate, that's a great thing. Unfortunately, the trajectory is not that way yet. Right now, all I see with AI is amplification of our biases and our limitations of certain sorts. I see amplification of self-righteousness in AI. But if we get to a stage where it allows for mutual growth, that'll be great. To the gentleman in the back, I think the most wonderful way to stay in the presence is just by being aware of your breath. You know, this breath, if we lose it, we won't be having an AI conversation right now. So all this drama and aspiration and excitement of life, it all hinges on one breath at a time. When we reach singularity, it might be a different issue. But right now, I think breath is a great way to think of present. And then one thing that we mutually suggest during our course is, as an exercise, as an exploration, is noticing one new thing every day. We tend to live our lives so mechanically on day-to-day basis that if you can even get to a state of just noticing one new thing, spontaneously perhaps or otherwise, and taking note of it, I think that'll be a good beginning.
So, I think my answer, like any human, will be biased by what we are. And I think as human beings, we have two things. We're alive and we're conscious. So we love that. And so I think I'll tie the questions together. So I think when we feel of something is flourishing, so there's something between complete order and complete chaos, this kind of special zone of life where you've got diversity, you've got change, you've got energy, you've got tension, you've got arguments, you've got life and death, and there's something that's special about being somewhere in the perfect sweet zone, and that's what keeps the earth kind of vibrant, it's what keeps our bodies going, and so I think we're looking for that space, and in that space of sort of, because like the science fiction story you talked about, if you end up where there's no more change, it's pretty boring. Or if you end up where there's so much change that there's no continuity, it's boring, right? And so for us, there's something in between. And I think that in between, to get to the notion of perception and so on, I think that on a good day, academia, our organization, as a collective, we're more conscious than one person. And we have perception, so we have lots of inputs. We are able to think more thoughts that are more complex than one individual. And I think being part of that and being conscious, like you're part of the collective intelligence, I think feels good. And I think that's the part about connecting with other humans. If you connect with a lot of really interesting humans and you're thinking big thoughts, and I can count on the fact that Martha's going to be interfacing with a whole bunch of really important people, and through her, I'll experience that. And so to me, on the presence, and we teach the class, we use the word awareness. I think the perfect happiness is being in an extremely vibrant, live, flourishing system with a lot of awareness of what's going on and feeling very conscious. And you do that by not going into autopilot, because when you're in autopilot, you're not conscious really, and you can't even experience the flowers or anything like that. And I do think that AI can help us collect that perception. It will let us think, if on a good day, it should let us think bigger thoughts. It should help us create more life and more complexity. And so I think they're not mutually exclusive. And I do think that we have a yearning for that. And I think that I do feel like, to end on an optimistic note, I feel like a lot of what we have is conditioning that's happened all the way back from the early roots of religion through the agricultural thing where we started enslaving animals to the modern industrial revolution where we tried to turn humans into robots to fight wars and work in factories. And we really, if we could remove that conditioning, I think that there is a possibility that we will start to figure out this yearning for this flourishing. And I think that's actually not unhealthy.
Cultivating the possibility for wonder and also finding ways to alleviate suffering would seem to be good goals. I see a couple more hands, so let's do another round. Over here.
C.J. Williams. I'm a philosopher and human rights activist. And two questions. Do you think it's important to actually know what it is to be human before we jump into AI or AGI and be very clear about that? And secondly, is there a difference between wisdom and intelligence? And can it be very dangerous to have intelligence without wisdom? Can AI have wisdom?
Thank you. Let's take another one over here.
I love this. This is great. Start playing games. Now, I have a little question and a little problem with the we we're talking about, because we still have 50% of the world's population who are not even on the internet. So is the we are discussing here a non-representative we? And how can we bring the whole voice, every voice, into this discussion?
Great, great.
Hi, Jacques Carolan, I'm a physicist. I think a lot which fixes the kind of direction of AI is those who program it. And whilst there are a lot of people doing that for good, we're in a kind of weird situation where people can come out of college with a computer science degree and walk straight into, say, a six-figure salary for a large corporation that's primarily driven by financial gain. So my worry is that that incentive has to change for there to be real kind of meaningful change in the direction of AI research.
Thank you. Over here. Good job.
I did not think that was likely to happen. I'm Aidan Van Oppen. I'm a resident fellow at Harvard Divinity School. I'm so thrilled that this conversation is happening. I think it's rare for faith leaders especially to think about their work in the context of the digital age. At least that's what I'm experiencing right now in my current context. And so bringing it back to Martha's question around who should be at the table, it strikes me that faith leaders tend to have the job description of caring for the spiritual well-being of individuals, of communities, of society. Obviously, technology, AI, and tech in general are shaping so much of that, yet it's rare for religious leaders to be at the table. And I'm defining religious leaders and faith leaders very broadly here. So I guess my question is, how do we change that? Is this the experience that you all are seeing as well? And how do we bring those voices to the table, whether it's people who are in that faith world recognizing the importance of thinking about their role and job in the context of the digital age, or whether it's sort of people in the tech world thinking about the importance of having those voices that have for hundreds of thousands of years been thinking about the nature of humanity and that sort of thing.
So the questions just get bigger and bigger. So there was one about what do we need to know about being human before we pursue more on the AI, AGI, and whether wisdom is different than intelligence. A question about who's the we. A question about this one about bringing faith leaders to the table, and I'm missing a question. What did I miss?
Incentives.
Incentives, money. That's why that's got it. Yeah. Money. So comments on these?
I think, one way I like to suggest is, intelligence is classifying tomato as a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. So you can have all kinds of data. Wisdom is a process of meta-extrapolation, and then its application, knowing, to some degree what the intended consequence is going to be. I think there is a greater degree of openness that we do see right now, at least in some tech leaders, around having a broader conversation on issues of diversity, intentionality, and direction, especially with the debacle we have had with social media and election and democracy. That, again, is internet neutral? Is it simply a tool? Is it simply a technology? What can it do? So I think, it has opened up at least some sensitivity around the kinds of conversations we can have, and perhaps, hopefully, even help us rethink and redesign tools for the present and future slightly differently. And with regards to the issue of we, it's what your capacity for empathy is. If your capacity for empathy is to be able to represent and speak for a wider collective, including other forms of sentient life, then it's fine, I think.
Well, to make it very concrete, there's at least a charge that Facebook is quickly spreading the anti-Rohingya imagery that is fueling the violence in Myanmar. And whether that's true or not, one thing is true, which is most of the Rohingya are not on Facebook. And so there is a major problem in who's in this conversation and who's not.
So again, issue going back to I mean, there were some concerns that at least I know personally had raised with Facebook executives even 3 years ago or 4 years ago, talking about the problem with echo chambers, talking about the silos that it was helping create, meaning increasing sort of virtual tribalism in certain ways. And those days, much of the concern was, no, it'll eventually sort itself out and it'll do good. And again, the argument being that very rarely when we allude to this idea of something sorting itself out eventually is a problematic scenario. And now you have some of the same executives speaking against Facebook. I wish they had spoken when they were on payroll of Facebook, but unfortunately not. So I think those are the challenges that we will see. But those challenges are an opportunity to diversify the conversations.
Great.
Yeah, and I can never outdo your wonderful tomato salad definition of intelligence. I will just complement it a little bit by saying that to me, intelligence has nothing to do with morality, and wisdom does. Intelligence is about how good you are at accomplishing a goal, how good you are at figuring out how to play chess, how to help people as efficiently as possible, or how to murder people as efficiently as possible. But wisdom involves morality. And as soon as you get to questions of morality, purpose, meaning, you get into this fascinating controversy, which I think tech nerds like myself are often quite guilty about screaming away from. Many of my colleagues just completely dismiss this as just fluff. It's not in the equations of physics, so shut up, And I just want to push back on that a little bit. And I feel safe doing so in the presence of you here.
Protection.
I feel that subjective experience is the only logical foundation one can have for morality, purpose, meaning, and so on. I had a long, fascinating debate for 2 hours again with Daniel Dennett, where he was trying to convince me that subjective experience is just an illusion, doesn't really exist, and I should shut up. I strongly disagree, and anyone who thinks that subjective experience is a red herring and not interesting, I challenge them to explain to me what's wrong with torture without any reference to subjective experience. In that case, it's just a bunch of electrons and quarks moving around in this way rather than that way, and what's so bad about that, right? So I think it's quite obvious that whenever we start talking about the ought, about what we should want, what we should aspire to, things to do with purpose and meaning, it has to link into experience. We'd be very naive if we think we could just leave that question to some scientist solving some equations and they're going to come up with an answer for us.
So there's a question that someone has sent about what about AI's own religion, and will there be interpretations of religious traditions offered by artificial intelligence, and how will humans deal with that? And I want to juxtapose that with Max's earlier question about what do we dream of, what's our utopia that we're imagining, and invite you each to speak about one or both of those topics.
Well, I want to say, because I want to let these two refute it if it's not true, but I think of well-designed religions as sort of codified historical rules that have come out through the wisdom of the ages. So in Japan, in the Shinto religion, or the Westerners don't call it a religion, it's in the miscellaneous pagan belief systems. But anyway, in Shinto, Japan was a little island and clearly out of resources. So in 1300, the emperor declares that we're vegan because we can't sustain livestock, and it becomes a religious thing. And a lot of the things that we see, whether it's about eating pork, they're sort of somewhere along the line, they decided this was the right thing, and they turned it into a belief system. And you may tell me I'm wrong. I read this in the book, Mouse's book on gift economies, but that the law, even the word stipulate, comes from a superstition of breaking a stick, and if you break the promise, God will smite you. And so I think religion is an interesting way that we've codified ways to try to get people to behave in a certain way. For a larger societal benefit. And again, there are poorly designed aspects of religion, but assuming that the good parts of it sort of do that. And so I would think that if we had an AI, or if we even our current society, the problem is we're moving really fast, and religions also evolve quite slowly. But I look at the indigenous peoples, and I kind of want to tie it a little bit to climate, because I think climate is a great tangible example of a complex self-adaptive system where more than enough is too much, right? The problem that, the cause of climate is our efficiency, our abundance. The cause of obesity is convenience. So a lot of the modern problems are because of this abundance. And I think the way that you tune the system, again, I get back to adapting with complex system, there's a sort of religion-like thing that you want the AIs, as well as our societies, as well as our corporations, beyond just the sort of fluffy corporate governance stuff, that makes them feel like they better do that or something's going to smite them, right? And it's like a belief system. And I feel like that belief system based, and this is where I think we can maybe learn as much from indigenous cultures, I think, as with modern religions, but to kind of think about it as how do you create a belief system for machines so that it's going to tend to look at things in a particular way.
I would say that religion related to AI has already started. I mean, there's a set of belief in everything we do, sorry to say that, including in science. And the way the AGI is presented to us, even if we don't have that, it's like a religion expecting its God, I would say. And we need to know that and take care of that, because that's perhaps where wisdom makes a breach in the system. Because, I would say that this is a religion which is only based on computation and what we said about optimization. Wisdom is so counterintuitive in so many ways that it will open a door to something that cannot be calculated, that cannot be predicted. And actually, this door for me is the open door on reality. Because reality is like that. Reality cannot be completely predicted, cannot be completely calculated, and so on. And I think that we need to keep that door wide open. We can do a lot in the rest, but we need to keep that door wide open. Otherwise, the danger is we will have a kind of religion that will not open to wisdom. I think bringing harmony and bringing empathy is part of what the religions are about. So a kind of better life for the people. And we say as Christians that our goal is sanctity, but sanctity, the saints are not perfect people. Some of them were completely nuts, actually. We need to be honest. But they, no. Don't quote me, but but just among us. Oh no, oh my gosh, too late. What I mean is, what makes sanctity is the relationship we have with God and with the others. And even without being a believer, we can consider that there's a kind of goal in improving the quality of our relationship with the others. And that can be the goal of all my life. And I think that when we put the AI in the loop, then we need to use even the time we have just to shape it, to build it, as a way also to improve our own ability to do that. I had a conversation earlier today with an expert working on empathy and AI, and she told me that the fact that working on that helped her to be even more empathetic. Just because when you train a machine to do something, you have to learn deeply what it is personally, and then you try to change. So changing the machine changes also yourself. And I think that's perhaps the kind of interaction we could expect from a very sophisticated AI, that it could help us to change in a very sophisticated way.
My hope is, we have had thousands of years of evolution that has given credence to some form of tribalism. However, we live in such a complex society of mixing population, diverse population right now, that even religion has failed on a whole when it comes to actually building that harmony. The word religion, religiosa, was itself to bring people closer, but I don't believe we did that. We only sort of amplified the tribal aspect in that as well. If we can create an AI that allows us to overcome some of this tribal nature, to be able to move to the next chapter of human evolution, of actually understanding humanity better, that will be a good AI. That will be something worth getting behind. The idea to reduce the tribalism, as that has contributed to much more suffering in modern times than ever.
It's really powerful. I'm going to ask, as we close out, each of you to say what you hope is a next step from this conversation. So it's not just a nice event, but it leads to something. And as I do, I'm just going to reflect myself on the book by Yuval Harari. How many have read *Sapiens*? I think he makes a very powerful point that what makes us human is our ability to tell and believe narratives that give meaning to our lives and also help us coordinate and collaborate with people we don't even know. And that sense of connection with people we don't even know, I think, is one thing that I would hope we could be striving for. But what is the next step here?
So I'll just riff off of you,
Yes.
which is I think we all alluded to this, but I think that we do need to include as much of society as we can in this conversation. And the problem is the language of the conversation has been engineering. It's now starting to change, but the language of theologians is actually extremely powerful and reaches into places that we can't access traditionally, and also reaches very deeply into the brain. And so I feel like coming up with a common language so we can have a narrative that multiple communities, both academic and non-academic, can have a single conversation and then allow this competition of ideas to work in an effective way. I think that's really key. And I think that I usually despise just talking and not doing.
Yeah.
But I think in this case, I think creating the language for the conversation is tremendously important. And so, and I do think that all of us are sort of trying to do, and then you have to translate it back to the lawyers and the politicians. That's your job.
I think it's all of our jobs. But translation is doing, and building a language is doing. Any last words, anyone?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to, down the road.
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
Okay, so
go first.
I would say perhaps working more on the deconstruction and analysis of those narratives that we have now in our society and among all the scientists around the world. I mean, not everybody thinks the same thing, for sure, but we have some like big waves, big movements, and if we understand them deeply and to understand what's part of the narrative, what's part of the belief, let's go backstage and see exactly what do they sell us, I would say. If we understand that more deeply, including from a spiritual point of view, or using spirituality as a frame to read it as a grid, it can be interesting just not to be trapped in a single narrative, or not to go in a way that we would not choose personally and consciously. So I think it's important. It could be, and I think the place here, so many things happen here, it could be a perfect place to initiate this kind of dialogue.
Max?
I think you were 1 femtosecond before me.
No, please go ahead. I'm collecting my thoughts.
Oh, okay.
So precise.
You mentioned Harari's book *Sapiens*, where one of the points he makes is that religion can be a collaboration enabler. So in that spirit, I feel that, in a very broad sense, shared negative visions is a great enabler of war and strife. Shared positive visions is the core of the enabling collaboration. when people can see, have a shared vision that if we work together, we can get something much better than any of us has right now. And so I'd like to close by just injecting some optimism from a physics perspective. I think we really need, as a next step, to broaden this conversation. And that's why I'm so happy that we're having a very broad conversation here. That's exactly also why I wrote my book. I think most people out there are still totally in denial about the fact that AGI is gradually happening. I watched all the debates in the last presidential election, and none of the candidates even mentioned AI at all, even when they debated jobs, right? Most people I know, even very educated people, still think that intelligence is something mysterious that can only exist in biological organisms, and therefore dismiss all this talk as just science fiction. But getting people engaged in this, it's not enough to just persuade people that it's possible. We also need to help people appreciate the magnitude of this incredible opportunity. So after 13.8 billion years, when we look around with our telescopes, we see that life itself is still an almost imperceptibly small perturbation on the seemingly dead and lifeless universe. And despite all the UFO news and the media cycle in the last 24 hours, we have not a shred of evidence yet that there is actually life with telescopes and internet anywhere out there in our observable universe. After 13.8 billion years. And many of my MIT students feel like, well, no point in thinking about these questions because we're so small and powerless, one little speck on this little planet in the solar system and a galaxy out of billions of others, and we live only 100 years, what's that? And it's a spark compared to 13.8 billion years. But actually, I've made an emotional U-turn myself in terms of from thinking they were utterly insignificant to very much the opposite, and I just want to end by sharing that personal experience. So I think it's quite likely that in the part of space that we call our universe, the spherical region light has reached us from so far in the 13.8 billion years, that we're the only life that's actually gotten to the point of telescopes, okay? And it's also very clear that after 13.8 billion years, we've reached the fork in the road where our tech is getting powerful enough that we, for the first time, actually have the power to extinguish life, or to really get our act together, get our house in order, and help life thrive on this planet and beyond, not just for the next election cycle, but for billions of years. And if we do that, then think about the difference we've made, right? And moreover, those of you who are MIT shouldn't even think, oh, I'm just 1 out of 8 billion people. You're not. You're very fortunate to be here and have much more influence than the average person on this little spinning ball in space. And I can tell you this, if billions of years from now, much of our observable universe is flourishing with amazing life, I have no idea how those life forms are going to think of us. But I can promise you this, they're not going to think of us as having been insignificant, because what we do here in our lifetime on our little planet will have made all the difference.
Wow. I think that's it. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.